Go live.
Wonderful.
All right, welcome everybody to chapter two. I'm delighted to be actually joined by Peter Henson. Now, the last time I saw Peter, would you believe, was in an airport in Barcelona almost 5 years ago, where we were running an exec camp and taking six of executives out of International Airlines Group. That's the company that owns British Airways, Iberian, Vueling, and Aer Lingus, to spend 8 weeks trying to launch new businesses to disrupt their existing business. And Peter was kind enough to join us by rerouting his flight, stopping and finding a back room in the hotel in the airport in Barcelona, to do a jam session with us and challenge the execs about their thinking, their beliefs, and the products that we had built. So it's great, firstly, to see you again, Peter. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Very happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Really appreciate it.
And what we're doing on this show is chapter two. Is it's a chance to speak with authors, thinkers, phenomenal leaders like Peter, where we get them to share a big idea of their book. What's one of the most important things to take away? But at the same time, do a deep dive into one of the chapters specifically, so we can really get a sense of what were some of the challenges or the focus that they want to share. So on this show, Peter's actually going to speak about chapter two on chapter two, which is always a fun for us. So to kick off, Peter, and there'll be lots of questions here as we see folks as they're joining, and as we go along, do throw questions in the stream, and we'll make sure I answer as many of them as we possibly can at the end. So Peter, the Phoenix and the Unicorn. I enjoyed reading the book. What's the big idea that you want people to sort of take away and hear a little bit?
Well, I think the reason I wrote the book, Barry, is that we spent a decade applauding the newcomers, the new kids on the block, the unicorns, and you couldn't go to a conference or somebody was talking about Uber this or Airbnb that, and I don't know about you, I was getting a little tired of all these unicorn stories, and don't get me wrong, I love startups. I did startups myself for a long time. But a lot of people in the audience were looking at those stories and thinking, yeah, but I'm not Uber, I'm not Airbnb. I have a lot of legacy that I have to deal with. How can I apply some of that thinking? So I started out to really, find out what companies were there that maybe, borrowed a few tricks from the unicorns and that were capable of reinventing themselves. And, to contrast that with the unicorns, I coined them the phoenixes because I believe that those companies that are capable of reinventing themselves, I think might be what is going to be the next decade that we want to learn about and think about. So after a decade of applauding the unicorns, I think the unicorns are now, yeah, they're there. But let's look at traditional companies. How can they reinvent themselves? How they can get stronger? And that's what I really wanted to find out. So I was looking for phoenixes.
Yeah, no, as someone who lives in San Francisco, believe me, I get pretty worn out of the unicorn narrative pretty quickly and pretty frequently. And working and spending time inside those businesses, what I've observed is that they have the same, if not more challenging problems and sometimes cultures than what we see in these sort of classic Phoenix organizations as you describe them. Look, what were some of those little cues for you then when you were inside the Phoenixes? Like, what were you looking around for and seeing that where you were like, oh, there's something unique here about these companies that will help them actually sort of rise from their ashes if they even needed to in the first instance.
Well, I think I really wanted to find some phoenixes in the first place, and I think the traditional companies as well as I do, Barry. I think we've seen a lot of companies that when they listen to stories about change or innovation, they often say, "Yeah, it's really really nice, but it just doesn't work here. I mean, we are too big, or we are too old, or we have too much hierarchy or bureaucracy." There's a lot of companies out there that I think could really, use a lot of change, but they feel that it's not for them. And one of the questions that I got a lot is the size issue. People said, well, if you're a startup, oh, it's easy. I mean, it's seven guys in a garage, and then you can see an opportunity in the morning and shapeshift in the afternoon. That is easy. But we're a big company. We're 100,000 it just isn't possible for us to change. So I picked up an invitation 3 years ago for actually observing what I think is one of the biggest companies in the world. And actually, turned out it was the biggest company in the world. I had a chance to visit Walmart in their headquarters in Bentonville in Northwest Arkansas. To be very honest, I'd never been to Arkansas, let alone Northwest Arkansas. So this was an opportunity for me to just go there. I have to say it has, made me rethink my idea of the middle of nowhere, but I loved going there. And I had relatively low expectations going to Walmart because I thought, well, they're a traditional company. They are a retailer that was really, really innovative in the last century, but now they're getting beaten up by the Amazons of the world. So I wanted to see. And when I got there, I was not just surprised. I mean, I was pretty much blown away because I saw the biggest company in the world, 2.5 million employees. There's actually only one organization in the world bigger than Walmart. That's the Chinese army, but that's not a normal commercial operation. And I found it fascinating to see a company with deep roots in Arkansas, 5,000 physical retail locations in the US, a global company. I mean, the international business of Walmart, where they are in India or in Brazil or in Canada, is more than $100 billion, and that's like the little sister of the big Walmart. So I was fascinated to see that big giant, and I was blown away by a company that was truly becoming a phoenix. I mean, they weren't there yet when I met them 3 years ago, but I had a chance to observe them and to follow them, and that really was the inspiration for me to write this book. I think at this moment, we've all seen how Walmart has done in the pandemic. They thrived in the pandemic. And what I found fascinating is that Walmart was preparing for war, and it was Amazon who really instigated that. But that preparation led them to be beautifully prepared for the strange episode of 2020 and really allowed them to leverage. And for me, Walmart is a great example of such a phoenix. And what I love about this is if any company, ever again tells me, yeah, but we're too big, I can say, well, look at Walmart. They're the biggest company in the world, and they've done a transformation that is truly remarkable. So it was for me a great opportunity to find out that phoenixes really, really exist.
Yeah, I think this it's almost like a defense mechanism for many companies, is especially the more established ones, is but we're different, but we're more regulated, but we can't take the risks, or our board doesn't allow us to do these types of things. It's such a classic sort of response mechanism when they see other companies doing something more innovative or just getting outside their comfort zone. What have been some of the tips that you would share, and maybe the observations you saw about what helped Walmart to start taking those risks? What were some of the things that you noticed in the leadership team there?
Well, I think you're absolutely right, and I think you've given me a really good tip now. I think I'm going to write a book, The Book of Excuses, which I think is a really good title because that's what corporates typically do. They have lists of excuses why it's impossible for them to actually change. It's an open invitation, Barry, to write it together.
I'll do a chapter anytime. Happy with it. Yeah.
But what I found with Walmart is a couple of things. One is a company needs a sense of urgency. And I think, I'll be very honest, it took Walmart a long time to actually rise to the occasion because they still thought of themselves as, yeah, we're the biggest, right? I mean, they probably took a really long time to take a startup from Seattle to take them very seriously. And it was probably until that moment where Amazon was getting more traction with the general US population than they were, that they said, red alert in Bentonville, Arkansas. The good thing about the sense of urgency is I think something like COVID actually helped a lot of companies to tighten that sense of urgency, but you need that. The second is you need to figure out a way when you do a transformation like that, when you become a phoenix, to combine the old and the new. And that I think is really, really difficult because you're so used to your old ideas and your old procedures and your old ways of going to market. For Amazon, it's very simple. They start from scratch and they build up a direct, online relationship with consumers. But Walmart, if you have 5,000 physical locations, what are you going to do? You can't just give them up. You need to combine online and offline. You need to combine the old and the new. And that is something which takes some time. And I think if you don't have top leadership commitment to make that happen, it's very difficult. You don't want to separate the old and the new. You want them to be really integrated. The third is, I think, something where sense of urgency, old and new, but you need to find a common vision on how to serve that customer going forward. Walmart, if you enter the home office in Bentonville, there's a big sign that says there's only one boss, that's the customer. Now, how many companies do you know that are customer centric? Every company is customer centric. But the way that Walmart translated that in the past was basically lowest price. I mean, the best way to please customers is to have the lowest price guarantee. And what they figured out a couple of years ago is, you know what? That doesn't work anymore in the 21st century, because it's important to have low prices, but maybe time has become more important than just cost. If you're a working mom, saving 15 minutes in your day can be more important than saving 15 cents on a packet of cornflakes. So how do you translate that purpose into that new reality? The fourth element is making sure that everybody has the same shared direction in the organization. And it helps with Walmart that it's still family controlled. The Walton family was the founder and still has the controlling stake. And they've given the CEO, Doug McMillon, really a long game. I mean, it's not next quarter, it's not the end of the year, it's a long game. And the last thing that I've seen with them, what they've done very, very well, is they said, we need to really empower the innovators. I mean, Barry, you know, how many companies have we seen where there are brilliant people who understand what the future should be, but those guys are isolated and frustrated that they have no effect on the mothership. And I think that is a combination of factors that I've seen that made Walmart into a company that I think has a really good chance of being one of the most shining phoenixes of the next couple of years.
Fantastic. No, I love it. Just like, and I love that you're talking about the old and new. You know, one of the things, I'm a secret history buff. So when I was reading the book, and the intro is such a great, journey through the various different sort of inflection points in industrial revolutions, which I really enjoy, right? Everything from you sharing ideas around how innovation happened in engineering around shipping, to building various different canals to allow people the shipping routes to become easier. I love when people sort of look back on the past to sort of inspire the future. This old and new idea that you're sort of alluding to, right? Which came to this idea of your hourglass model, and I think it's a really great idea for people to hear. Please elaborate a little bit about what your model is about and how it builds upon your previous work from the day after tomorrow. And I think just so listeners have a sense of the thinking behind it.
No, I'd love to. And as you said, central to the idea of the Phoenix and the Unicorn is that hourglass model. And it's a shape that we all know. There's a top and there's a bottom. I actually, Barry, I got the idea from the hourglass model from an opportunity to meet a company called Medtronic. I don't know if you've ever, came across them, but they're one of the largest medical device companies in the world.
That nobody knows, right? It's all these great companies, they're like billion-dollar companies and no one knows they exist, right?
And it's incredible. Medtronic is 100,000 employees. I think it's like $30 billion in revenue. And well, it's good that most people don't know because they make pacemakers. I mean, that is one of their prime products. They are the king of pacemakers. It's actually, I mean, and that's why I love history, and you can see that from the books as well. I mean, the origins of the company is just spectacular. You're going to love this because the origins it goes back to the 1940s, where in Wisconsin there was a guy called Earl Backen who was a repair guy for medical equipment. And during a huge thunderstorm in Wisconsin, for 3 days there was a complete blackout. And actually a lot of cardiac patients died because they were hooked up to machines that would help stimulate their heart, but because there was no electricity, they couldn't save those patients. And Earl started thinking about the incident, saying there's got to be a better way. And he came up with a battery-powered, heart monitoring and recovery system, and that became the pacemaker. It's a wonderful story of a guy in his garage building a company that eventually is a $30 billion company. But Medtronic had the great advantage of tapping tapping into the pacemaker market and becoming king of the hill. And then what we've seen with so many companies is you become complacent because it's so easy to make money on your core product, and then you focus all your effort on scale, run, efficiency, and bottom line.
Yeah.
And then you tend to just lose sight of things that might be outside of your normal vision. And a few years ago, Medtronic came into a situation where they were constantly going about, building more business on the products and services and procedures they knew. But you saw companies like Apple, for example, with the Apple Watch, building in monitors and measuring your EKG and your heart rhythms, and now they can measure your blood saturation. And it's incredible to see that a company that makes these devices was actually capturing more heartbeats than a company like Medtronic and doing interesting stuff with that data. And they started to realize that, they needed a wider lens. And they came up with that hourglass model, which I love. The top of the hourglass, the really big funnel part, that's your wide sensing. This is your, picking up ideas that outside of your normal field of vision. And that's exactly what I call the day after tomorrow. How much time do you spend on today, tomorrow, day after tomorrow? Today is the hundreds of emails and the dozens of Zoom calls. Tomorrow is next year's budget. I love budgets. Budgets are yearly sadistic rituals where people put fake news into Excel that is consolidated in something which never works. And then there's the day after tomorrow. New ideas, concepts, business models that could change the rule of the game. And the problem is, today is important, brings value, tomorrow's important, but the day after tomorrow could be crucial in a world that moves fast. So the top of the hourglass, this is your sensing that you do, and then you experiment, you boil it down. So the top of the hourglass is what I call sense and try. And then it falls into the bottom part of that hourglass. This is where you scale and run. And Medtronic said, well, how much time do we spend actually on the sense and try, and how much on the scale and run? And they came to a staggering idea that they were probably spending less than 1% of company resources in the top part of the hourglass, sensing and trying, and 99% of their activities in the scale and the run part. And I think they realized that was not going to cut it. That was not enough if they wanted to survive in a world that was evolving and moving so quickly. So they said, we need to radically change that. And if you look at that model, there are two things that are essential. One is how much resources, time, energy, budget, but also, people and talent do you spend in the top and in the bottom? But the second element, and that's maybe the most important one, is how do you make sure that you align the top with the bottom part? Because as we said earlier, we've seen so many companies that have brilliant people thinking about the day after tomorrow, but it doesn't actually fall into the bottom. There's no alignment between top and bottom. And then these people just get frustrated and all their activities are basically a complete waste. So I became really, really, enthusiastic about that model. And I asked if I could turn that into, a big part of the book. And that became chapter 2 of The Phoenix and the Unicorn.
Yeah, now what I love about this model as well is it just gets richer and richer when you start to think about it, right? I love this idea of thinking of ratios of how much are you investing at the top of the glass versus the bottom, even inside each of those segments, right? Like how much are you spending in this, the try, in the sense, and that they're different competencies, right? And exploring new ideas versus executing those ideas and scaling them. And I think it's such a lovely way for leaders to sort of think about their portfolio of innovation, really. Like innovation's happening across that entire hourglass. It's not just the cool kids hanging out on beanbags in the sensing zone. If it doesn't go all the way through the glass, we're missing opportunity there. What has been some of the sort of fun insights you've had as you start to play around and bring that model to life with some of the companies you've been working with?
Well, I think I had a chance this summer to do some work with Safi Bahcall, who wrote the book Loonshots.
Oh, great! Yeah, he's a great. Yeah, awesome.
And Safi talks about the difference between soldiers and artists. And it was interesting because you could really map those two ideas onto that same model, because the top of the hourglass, that's where you need the artist. That's people who see things that other people don't see. They have the guts to try things that nobody else would dare to do. And then the bottom of the hourglass, you have the soldiers. These are the people that love to scale and run. And what was interesting to observe is that I think that the companies that are successful are the ones that really know how to combine the two. I mean, they have to be aligned. I mean, you can't have them separate because then it just falls apart. A great example of that is Google, right? I mean, I had a chance to visit Google X a few times. It's Disneyland for nerds. I mean, this is super, super smart people who think about the future, and it's a brilliant way to think about the day after tomorrow. But almost nothing that Google X has developed actually matured and fell into the bottom half of the hourglass. In a way, Google is, in that sense, a company that really, really needs to work on that alignment to make sure that, it's not just a couple of elitists who think that, the rest of Google is beneath them, and the other people think, hey, we're working our asses off to give these guys the possibility to fly balloons all over the place. You need to align that, and I think that is absolutely crucial. But you have to be mindful because they might be different cultures. I mean, an artist and a soldier, they have to mutually understand that it's going to be better for them to collaborate because then this is a continuous cycle. Another thing that I've seen is that a lot of people said, okay, I get it. It just goes in and then it falls and then it works. But no, it's really a continuous cycle. And I think this is what we're seeing now with many companies, and you know this very well, Barry. I mean, a lot of companies were still, stupefied by digital in the last decade. And they said, oh, we really need to focus on getting digital right. Excellent. But it's not because digital is done, check, that you go back to normal. No, this is a continuous loop because we're probably going to see more disruptive innovations and ideas in the next decade than in the last. So you really need to see that as a continuous flow if you want to be successful.
Yeah, no, really good. And I love the way you even bring it, these artists and soldiers, and it's fascinating, right? Like Tim Cook ran operations for Apple, right? Like that was his job, and now he's the CEO and has to manage both ends of these funnels. Astro Teller, our friend at Google X, right? Like straight out there, just like dreaming up these ideas. And in many ways, Google's idea is it's a top down, right? Go figure out cars, go figure out internet connectivity all over the world. Like there's 4 or 5 people that drop stuff in there. So I think every company is so different about how they drive those behaviors, even the personalities of the leaders and how they show up in there. So I think there's just so many great, as I say, real richness about how you can sort of build out this thinking from a really great mental model for folks.
And just to add on that, Barry, I think what is really interesting, and you touched on that, I think a leader today who is capable of transforming an organization and doing a phoenix phenomenon, I think a leader does need to have enough, I think, symbiosis with both halves of the hourglass. I think a leader that is only focused on bottom line, efficiency, scale, I mean, the typical Jack Welches of the last century are not going to survive. If you would have, people that only, are excited about the new shiny stuff, that probably won't work as well. And I think leaders who have the capability to understand both and talk to both the artists and the soldiers, I think those are going to be the ones that will be very successful. I go back to Walmart, the example. Doug McMillon, for me, is an excellent CEO who really understands the nuts and bolts of retail. He can talk to any of the 5,000 store managers and really talk about what happens on the floor. But he's also capable to understand how technology, innovation, automation is going to completely transform. And I think leaders really need to understand both parts of that hourglass.
I think it's a fantastic tip, Peter. So in closing then, what's one thing that you would love readers to sort of, if they walk away from reading this book, what's one sort of lesson you'd love them to sort of take away from it?
For me, it's very simple. I wanted to write a book for traditional companies not to feel left out. And I became obsessed with that. And the more I look, the more I find extremely beautiful examples of companies that sometimes are really old companies, but that can really reinvigorate themselves. So I wanted to, find proof, and I think the book is proof. And you find wonderful examples all over the place.
Yeah, well, look, the book is packed with so many great tips, great inspiration, great history lessons, which again I'm a fan of. So, like to the folks out there, make sure you give us some feedback in the stream. It's really fun, Peter, to have you on this sort of high impact, very focused show that we're doing. And thank you for not only sharing a big idea of the book, but actually the real sort of richness of this sort of model, right? Like how people can actually start to have a great way to think and frame their work. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you very much.
It was wonderful to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me, and good luck with the rest of the show. Thanks, Barry.
There you go. Well done.